school, and this was purchased and restored by the Mesa Historical Society. And it was one of Virgil Chrisman's dreams, and so that's the reason it was voted on to name it the Chrisman Farm and Heritage Museum. So those that went to school out here, it'll bring back lots of memories, and they was happy to restore it a lot for the Lehigh residents around here. And this is where the Phelps room is. So we'll show a little bit of the outside and a lot of the farm machinery that has been donated by many of the farmers around here. And we'll go inside and see the Phelps room. Entry room of the Historical Society, or the museum that the Historical Society restored. And here in the entry, they have built what they call a Tree of Mesa's Life. And it's a fundraising project, but on the little limbs there, the different families have bought leaves. On the leaves, it has the names of the native Mason and the year that they were born, and they're trying to put them into family groups. So it's a beautiful sight when you walk in the front door and see all of the natives, hopefully, will be on that tree. And then in years to come, why their ancestors can come in and find their name up there with the year of their birth and when they were here and all. So it makes a beautiful attraction for a museum. Come down the hall from the tree. Why, this is the entrance into the Phelps, Morris, and Bowen room. And this plaque says that this room dedicated to Mesa's history by the family of Robert Bowen, who was born in 1849 and died in 1909. Hiram Bowles Morris Sr., who was born in 1821, died in 1908. And Hiram Smith Phelps, who was born in 1846, died in 1926. Now, Hiram Phelps came in Mesa in January 1879, I believe. He was the second group of the pioneers when they arrived here in Mesa. So we'll go in and visit the room in their memory. What do they call that?
Crest, family crest.
Yeah, okay. That's the family crest that hangs on the door, and that was made by Ward Phelps. And Ward is a son to Uncle Guy and Aunt Ruth Phelps. So that's quite a memorial that he made and donated it to the room. Cy Fryer sculptured, and he gave it to his sister Lucy Fryer Vance, and she donated it at our cousin's party that we had just last week. And that sculpture is of his grandfather, Hiram Smith Phelps. Looking straight into the room is the bedroom. This room has been divided off into 3 rooms, a bedroom and a kitchen and the parlor. So as you walk in, you'll see the quilts there by the banister was made by Aunt Hattie Phelps Miller. And on the mannequin there is the wedding dress of Amy Phelps Morris. And the pictures that's directly behind her up at the top are the wedding pictures. The top one is Uncle Orson and Aunt. I can't read the dates from here of their wedding dates, but that was their wedding pictures. Then the little clothes that's hanging on the clothes tree there, they're baby clothes of Bill Riley. Bill Riley is the son-in-law to Amy Phelps Morris. And those were his baby clothes, and those originally, of course, came from New York. And then the other picture that's by the wedding pictures, the large picture that's above the bed are some of the Phelps sisters of Mary Elizabeth Phelps and Hiram Phelps. We'll start at the bottom. On the left-hand side is Clara Robson, and the center one there is Barbara Allen, and the one over to the far right then is Aunt Esther Whitecott. Then back up in the back on the left is Amy Morris, and the next one's Hattie Miller, and Aunt Gertie Wilson. And those, many times, my mother Amy used to refer that picture as the Smilers, because she says there wasn't a one of them smiling. They were all so sober. And then Aunt Gertie used to tell us that she was the baby, and that's the reason she got to wear the bow in her hair. But those were all handmade dresses, and I don't know what year that picture was taken. We've never been able to find out just what year, but they've always been proud of that picture. And then the picture over to the left of that, the very top, is their sister, Luciette Phelps Fryer. And the picture just below her is her daughter, Lucy Fryer Vance. And Lucy, or was what we know her as, is Toot. She was 5 years old when that picture was taken. And she really seemed more like a sister because her mother died when Lucy was born. And Grandma Mary Elizabeth Phelps took her and raised her with the rest of her daughters. So that's the reason we hung those pictures there, because they're all sisters, and then the niece was raised like a daughter. Then the bed, the quilt there on that bed, was made again by Aunt Hattie. And then the sewing machine to the far side was just an antique sewing machine, and it was restored by a man in the Historical Society, a Mr. Parkinson. And he did a beautiful job of restoring that for us. Down on the bottom on the floor by the quilts that's hanging on the quilt rack, that's a little horse rocking chair. And that was the toy of Tom and Bob Bowens when they were little boys. And then those are just little antique toys on the floor. The little shoes that's on the floor underneath the bed there, those were the shoes of Genevieve Morris Bowen. And those had been preserved by her children, Velma and Catherine. And they were real happy to bring those into the room for their mother and fathers. We can go over to the right of the bedroom, and there's a glassed-in closet that we use for personalized artifacts over to the right. If you want to get to the front of that. They're memorials, that they're little memorial artifacts, I guess I could say, that's been donated by many of the grandchildren of Hiram Phelps. Up at the top on our right is a picture of our grandfather, Hiram Phelps, and his sister, Ollie Phelps. And then the picture over to the far left is a picture of our cousin, Edwin Miller, who was a grandson to Aunt Hattie Miller. On the second shelf, the picture there to the back is Aunt Esther Whitcott's graduation picture. Her son, Lavelle, brought that picture to us, and so we were real happy to put that graduation, because she was a school teacher here in Mesa for many, many years. And then the, what do we call it? Turn it off a second. That's a stereopticon. I guess I had to go over and read that. That's a stereopticon photograph that Grandma Morris, Eliza Morris, had, and the grandchildren brought that in. And then on the third shelf, starting over here on our right, there's a little pair of glasses there, and those were Mary Elizabeth Bingham Phelps's glasses. And then that's a little jewelry box that was given to them. Then the picture that's standing in the back is a picture of our great-grandmother, Lucretia Thorne Bingham. And then there's some old straight-edge razors. Some of those belong to Uncle Orson Phelps and Charlie Morris, and the old shaving mug. Then there's a mutual book that's standing behind there that belonged to Amy Morris that she had in 1932. And then there's an old hymn book. Then the two watches, the pocket watches that's in the dome glasses, those were donated by Phelps Morris, and that's his father's pocket watch, and also Hiram Bowles Morris Jr.'s pocket watch. Then on the fourth shelf, we find the old typewriter that Aunt Rebecca Allen Phelps. When Elizabeth donated that, she says, "Can you imagine my mother doing all of her genealogy on that typewriter?" But that's what she used to do all of her genealogy. And then in the photograph album that's standing up are just old pictures of Mesa way back in the early days that had been brought in of the old photograph. And then the book that's standing is the Phelps original book that Aunt Barbary Phelps Allen made for all of her nieces and nephews in 1953. And her daughter, Barbara Allen Crandall, brought that in and donated it because it's the hardbound cover. In that book is the history of our great-grandfather, Morris Phelps, and his wife, Sarah Thompson Phelps, and Mary Elizabeth, and Sarah Clarinda, and Hiram Smith. All of their life histories are in there, along with the 26 children that Hiram Smith had. Each one of the family histories and a picture of their family is in that book. And Aunt Barbary was 76 years old when she compiled that book. So if you can imagine the hours that, maybe I could even say months, that she spent in compiling that book for all of her nieces and nephews. This is the other part of the bedroom, and the little doll coat that's hanging on that chair was Rita Phelps Patton's little doll coat that her mother made for her. She said she wasn't hardly 2 years old, and she could remember her mother making that little doll coat for her. So when she heard that we were building this room for the Phelpses, she mailed that over to us from California, and she says, now I know this coat's got a home. She used to worry what was going to happen to that coat when she wasn't here, because she's treasured that little doll coat. And I believe Rita's about 86 years old now, so that little coat, we could say, is 84 years old. The little doll is just an antique doll. It doesn't belong to anybody in the family. Do you want to get this? Now, if you want to get close-ups of those pictures, if you can get over the rail, good over the rail, and I'll hand you the side of the wall is the families. This picture we're looking at right now is the first home that Grandpa Phelps built when he was in Mesa. And he built that for he and Clarinda. That home was located on the southwest corner of First Avenue. It was the southeast corner of First Avenue and Hibbert Street. That's a picture of our Grandma Phelps, and it was the Bingham family. And the top picture the top one on the left-hand side is Sarah Clarinda Bingham Phelps, and then the far right-hand side is Mary Elizabeth, and this was their family. And that's Grandpa Phelps. He was 80 years old when that picture was taken, and it's taken in front of the Second Ward, which was located on First Avenue and Center Street. But he was 80 years old when that picture was taken. And then this is a picture of Hiram and Mary Elizabeth's family. That's Hattie up to the back on the left, Hattie and Gov. Gov is Esther, and then Wilford, and Barbara and Clara. And at the front is Grandpa Phelps, and Gertrude, Amy, Arson, and Mary Elizabeth. And this is a picture of Grandpa Phelps still there at the Second Ward on his 80th birthday with his two wives. That's Clarinda on our left and Mary Elizabeth on our right. This has always been this picture was taken at the Rendezvous Park in memoriam of their father's 100th birthday. And I've always liked this picture because it seemed like it was just to their prime years. Here at the front, on the bottom, seated down, is Uncle Arson. The next picture is Uncle William. Aunt Lou, Uncle Joe, and Uncle Cal. And at the back is Aunt Barbary, Aunt Hattie, Amy, Aunt Clara, Gertrude, and Esther. That picture of Aunt Lou, she was the oldest of the 26 children of the two families. That just like our grandmothers had, you had to climb up on a box and turn the handle and make it ring in order to get the operator. And then there's the picture up there that says there's no place like home except Grandma's, and I think all of the ancestors can relate to that, to go to Grandma's and use their telephone, eat their sugar cookies with the raisin in the middle of it. And then this would be a typical dining area that they would have. And those glasses sitting on top of the big book there was Grandpa Phelps's glasses. The beautiful china cabinet, that was donated to the room by Betty Schill and Otto Schill. Betty was a granddaughter to Eliza and Hiram Bowles Morris, and a daughter to Sophie. But we like to draw your attention to the little tea set, china tea set that's there on the top of the china closet or cabinet. That was donated by Neva Menhennet King. She was a granddaughter to Uncle Calvin Phelps. When she brought that, she told us that our Grandpa Phelps gave that to Calvin and Laura for a wedding present when they got married.
Table.
That's just a typical kitchen table, I'm sure, like many of we can remember, that was in our grandparents' home. And the picture up above is a very significant of, can you just imagine Grandpa Phelps sitting there at his table giving the blessing for his bread and milk. He was a big bread and milk lover. So we can just kind of visualize our grandpa there. Coming across, we see the old wood stove. The wood stove was donated to the Phelpses by Stan Porter family. And now Stan Porter's ancestors baptized our great-grandfather Morris Phelps. So there's a little bit of connection back there. I don't recall the Porter's first name, but it's in Morris Phelps's history of this Mr. Porter that baptized him, and he is an ancestor to Stan Porter. The things up at the top are the old milk cans, the little can there that they made the steam pudding in, and the white bucket that's there next to the pudding box belonged to Eliza Morris. That was her milk bucket, and Velma Bowen Tucker brought that in and said that used to belong to Grandma Morris. So we're kind of proud of that and think how old that is. The other things are just old artifacts that were brought in to make it look like hopefully it was in our grandparents' day. As you come around and you see the old pump, Orson Phelps brought that pump in and donated it, and then Virginia McClaws took it and restored it and made it look like a new pump. We see the scrub board there on the floor. That was Aunt Esther Whitcott's scrub board. And then the ice cream freezer belonged to Paul and Barbara Crandall. And Barbara said she'd like to have a nickel for every time for every turn that she's put on that ice cream freezer. And then the container that's just below the cheese box there, that's what we would know now as a bread bosh, but that was what they used to mix the bread in. And then the old crock that they made sauerkraut in, or olives or pickles, but that was a type of crock that they used. Coming on around to the big cupboard are the cooking items that they used in those days. There they had baking powder. You can see that was for 25 cents. The butter churn That was turned by the hand with the glass butter churn. We remember the wooden ones too. And then the little square box is what they would put the butter in as they would mold it down and put it on a plate. Then to the left, there's a little board there that's got 2 glass jars sitting on top of it. Zelma Miller brought that in and said that belonged to Ed Miller, and that was what he made coleslaw with. That would be his coleslaw grater that he used many, many years. And he even painted his name on it, so whoever borrowed it would remember where it was. But that has the name of Ed Miller written on it. So we were glad she brought that in for us. Then we see here at the top the old clock. That's the Big Ben that we'd always try to remember to wind it up so it'd wake us up in the morning, and the lamp that they would burn the kerosene. Those were the type of things that they used in those days. Now if we could get a picture of the ice box. The type of ice boxes that they used in those days. They would set the block of ice in here, and then they would keep their food here in the bottom. And this is the ice pan that would catch the ice drippings. If you didn't forget to empty that, you got to mop the floor up with the ice drippings. But you always wanted to try to remember to empty the water out of this. Now, if you're wondering how did the Iceman know what size of ice, or what size of an ice box you had a little sign that said 15 or 20 pounds. You put that up in the window when the Iceman come along, and if he saw that sign that said 15 pounds, and it was probably a nickel, why, the Iceman would bring in that little block of ice and put it in the ice box for you. So that's how he knew what size of ice block to bring to you. Here's 2 butter churns that's quite interesting. When that churn was donated to the room, it was given to us in a cardboard box, and all that we had was just pieces of board. And it did have the rings there on it. And so this Mr. Parkinson that restored the sewing machine said he'd love to put that together. So he restored that for us, and of course we hurriedly put it in the Phelps room. But that is a beautiful job of restoring it. Now, to tell you a little story about the little rings that go around that churn, the people that made those were called coopers, that made the attachments, whether it was by wood or by metal. They were called coopers. And as I was reading the history of our grandfather Morris Phelps, it said he was a cooper, and I never knew that before. But that's what he did, is he made the rings that went around that held buckets and churns, as you see here. That's what he did when he was a young man. This is the old Victrola like they used to have in the homes. And here they would have this old handle, and this is how they would wind it up. So when they get it all wound up, we turn it on, and here's some music. Now, we've got the record of Carolina Moon.
You better sing it.
You want me to sing Carolina Moon to this music? Can you hear it good enough?
Not very loud.
Not very well. Go to the right. Go. Sing it with me, Paul. Carolina moon, shining shining over the one who waits for me. Okay, there you are. You heard Carolina Moon, but that's the old Victrola like they used to have. This is a cabinet, and this is what they used to keep their music in. And I was just telling Paul, that's what we can remember so about Grandma Aunt Sarah Clorinda Phelps, because she had a cabinet very similar to that. It has its shelves in there and it's all divided, and that's the way you could keep the sheet music. Sitting here on this cabinet is a knitting bag, and it's got tatting. Now that would belong to Aunt Rebecca Allen Phelps. And Elizabeth and John donated that so we could remember Aunt Rebecca in there. This picture here on the wall, that's a picture of Robert Bowen and his wife Elizabeth Bowen. And that's when they were married. The pictures up on the wall, that's Aunt Eliza Smith Morris, as many of them knew. It's Grandma Morris. And then her husband, Hiram Bowles Morris Jr. His father actually came to Mesa before he did. We could almost call our great-grandpa Morris a winter visitor, because when he got here, he sent word for his son, Hiram and Eliza, that was in St. George. Told him to come to this beautiful place in Mesa. There might have been 2 or 3 homes, but that's when they first got here. The lamp that you see here is still a kerosene lamp, and then the clock. Those belong to Bill Riley's family in New York, and he donated those to the room. And then the organ was an organ that Catherine Bowen Brenner and George Brenner had, and they donated that into the room to help it look like a typical parlor that it would have been. But I don't ever remember either one of the Grandma Phelpses having an organ. Do you, Paul?
No.
I don't believe they ever had one, but they did have the Victrolas. But many of the homes had the organs in those days. The chair that's there by the old Victrola, that was in Eliza Morris's home all their married life, and Velma Tucker brought that in. And then the mannequin is the wedding dress of Elizabeth Bowen, and that's the same wedding dress that was there in their picture that you saw a while ago on the wall. The bookcase that you see was Mary Elizabeth Phelps's bookcase. It found its way clear up to Salt Lake, and Esther Whatcott had it, and she had given it to Lavelle. And so Lavelle put it in the back of his station wagon and brought it here, and much of the glass was broken, and we had the glass restored. And then there's many books that's in this bookcase. They're mostly the Improvement era books. They've got our Grandpa H.S. Phelps' signature in his books, and Homer and Lucy Phelps brought those books to donate. So we were real happy to have those to go back in the bookcase once again. But that was our grandma's bookcase.